look back in hindsight, everything is 2020. In hindsight, we make mistakes, we're learning from it. In hindsight, yesterday and your tomorrow. In hindsight, is so much clearer now.
Welcome to Hindsight the Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Jones, and today I have a truly inspiring guest joining me. Her name is Ellen Busch, and her story is one of resilience and transformation. Raised in a loving family but haunted by trauma, Ellen found herself without a home, a job, or hope for the future. Battling the stigma of dyslexia and escaping an abusive marriage, Ellen's journey is one of overcoming adversity and finding empowerment. Her book, Disempowered, traces her path from feeling unworthy and powerless to realizing that every challenge she faced was a stepping stone towards her own strength and self-discovery. I'm thrilled to have Ellen here today to share her remarkable journey with me. How you doing, Ellen?
I'm great, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you.
Oh, it's an honor for me to have you here. Where are you calling in from?
I am just outside of Denver, Colorado. I'm about halfway between Boulder and Denver, and we are in the middle of a massive snowstorm. So the skiing is going to be fantastic this weekend.
I was just telling you before we started, we have a windstorm, so I guess the kiting will be amazing.
There you go.
So it's definitely good to have you on the show. So we want to talk
Sure.
about some of the challenges that you faced, and you faced quite a bit, right? And here you are now, right? So so first of all, just tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So at a very young age, around 6 or 7 years old, I was diagnosed as dyslexic. And when I went through the school system, the attitudes and bias were terrible. And I was basically written off as a 7-year-old. And it was painfully obvious that I was an intelligent and capable child. And yet I struggled in the classroom. So you live in this kind of dichotomy of struggle, but you know you're smart. And it's very difficult to reconcile that as a child.
Right.
You know, I'm really fortunate because I had amazing parents who supported me and did everything they could for me. They did not accept the academic death sentence, if you will, that the teachers tried to impose on me.
As much as you can remember, what did that look like as a 6 or 7 year old with how did they treat you? How did the school system treat you?
Yeah. You know, they treated me like a second-class citizen. They just wrote me off. You know, I'd get that little pat on the head, that little condescending pat on the head. You know, don't worry about it if you're not getting it.
Yeah.
But specifically, there was a parent-teacher conference, and my parents told me about it when I was an adult, when it was appropriate. The administrator sat my parents down and told my parents that I would never go to college. I might finish high school. I would not be contributing to society other than as a wife and a mother. And they should really focus on finding me a husband who would take care of me.
How old were you in this conversation? Not the conversation between you and your parents, but the conversation between the parents and the teachers.
That happened. I was 6 or 7. I don't remember exactly how old I was when I was diagnosed as dyslexic, but that was the conversation to say, your daughter is dyslexic and this is her future.
Where did you go to school? Was it in Colorado?
I grew up in the New York City suburb of Croton-on-Hudson, which is actually a pretty affluent community.
Yeah.
And a lot of people move to those communities specifically for those schools.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't mean to jump in. I just wanted to ask
No, that's okay.
questions. Yeah.
That's okay. You know, and that parent-teacher conference ended with my mother pounding her fist on the table saying, I refuse to allow you to condemn my daughter.
Wow.
Yeah. So and my parents went to work after that and they supported me. They did, you know, my mother did homework with me every night. My dad was always my cheerleader in the background. My dad understood that the real learning happens outside of the classroom. So he always gave me challenging things to do to learn how to persevere. Things like Outward Bound at 15, getting certified to scuba dive at 17. And those events were critical for me to learn how to persevere. Unfortunately, I was severely traumatized by the school system.
Yeah.
And that just makes sense. You know, when you're treated like a second-class citizen and you're written off, that's traumatic. So despite my parents' support, despite all of their help, I persevered, but I was terribly wounded. Low self-esteem, low self-worth. And moving forward, as an adult, I carried that with me. I didn't know it was there. And guess what? I ended up married to a narcissist. And it was an abusive relationship. And I actually had to plan and execute an escape from him, which I did successfully. Yeah, it was pretty bad. So, and then when I got out, I realized I was really in trouble and I was very traumatized. And I went to work. And I went to work working with therapists and coaches. And I learned how to heal. I learned how to rebuild my life, to recreate myself. And I learned how to thrive. And now I live here in Colorado and I ski the mountains every weekend.
Ellen, can you share a pivotal moment or an experience that helped you break free from a feeling of powerless or being unworthy?
You know, it really started with a surrender point. I just looked up to this guy and said, you know what, I'm all yours because I don't know what else to do. And that actually, as strange as that may sound, that was actually a very empowering moment because I knew I wasn't in it alone.
Okay.
And I have never felt alone since then. But I did have a very empowering moment when I've done some training with Commander Mark Devine, who's a retired Navy SEAL.
Oh, okay.
And he has training events for civilians. And I was doing martial arts training at one of these events, and I was not really fully engaged. I wasn't quite getting it. And I was sparring with this instructor who had 30 years of experience, and I accidentally hit him in the face. And I went, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hit you.
Yeah.
You know, kind of that little girl, low self-esteem mode.
Right.
And he got in my face and he said to me, don't be sorry. I'm trying to effing kill you. And I went, whoa. And I realized at that moment I wasn't fully engaged.
Yeah.
And I needed to be fully engaged to learn how to defend myself.
Right.
This training was very important for me to learn how to defend myself because, you know, with that ex-husband lurking out there somewhere, I needed to be prepared.
Right.
And I woke up. I mean, that was a huge wake-up moment for me. And I said, all right, I'm all in. And I just went all in through the rest of the training, and it was a few more days. And I was just fully engaged in the training. And I realized after I had some time to process the event that as a low self-esteem woman, I was a target. I was prey. I might as well have been that little wounded deer walking through the woods because the predators were looking for me. And my ex-husband was one of them. And he found me. And I made a decision that I would never be that again. And I have continued training and I have continued and still working on it. And every day I get a little bit better and a little bit stronger. And I'm even more prepared.
Would you recommend this for others who may be struggling with the same feelings of inadequacy and hopelessness?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I would say is that you're probably carrying around some trauma, whether or not you know it. And trauma's a sneaky little jerk. It hides. And you may not be conscious of it. So the first thing I think a person needs to do is to address that trauma and work with a licensed, credentialed therapist.
Okay.
Trauma will hold you back. It is insidious and it will fester. So I think that's the first thing to do. And then get out there and find things that interest you. that will teach you to persevere.
Right.
Take on challenges, appropriate challenges. A little disclaimer here. It's got to be right for you. It's got to be physically appropriate, emotionally appropriate. The training I've done with Mark Devine and retired Navy SEALs has actually absolutely changed my life. They are the best in the world at what they do, and it's been a privilege to train with them. I even did some firearms training. I'm not a firearms enthusiast, but I wanted to know, my father wanted me to know how to safely handle a firearm. And don't own a firearm, not interested in owning one, but knowing how to safely handle one that's important.
Yeah.
And I got out on the firing range with a retired Navy SEAL who served for 20 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to work with him one-on-one.
Yeah.
And I was terrified. But he took me through it professionally and patiently.
Right.
And I came out of that with a different mindset. Just a different way of looking at the world. Like, I was empowered. And every time you take on a challenge, you become empowered. And it sometimes can be really small steps, and sometimes it can be great leaps.
Yeah.
Every time you get uncomfortable and take on a challenge, there's going to be a reward. May not be the reward you expect that it's going to be, but there will be a reward. Yeah.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, but how did you start to redefine success and begin to recognize your own accomplishments?
I really started to say, you know what, that came from inside of me. Everybody said I was never going to go to college. Well, I went to college. I got a bachelor's degree and I got a master's degree. And then I wrote a book. So clearly the administrators at my school got it wrong.
Yeah.
I started to give myself credit for that.
Yeah.
That book came from my heart. I took the time, and it took a long time to write that book. It took me 5 years to write it.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does.
Okay.
Hey, and one of the other things I just want to follow up on, obviously when you have dyslexia, right? So are there any skills or tips on how you navigate that now?
I think the first thing to understand is that it's not an intellectual disability. And many people, most of society views it as such. It's really, I'd start with the understanding that you're just different. Your brain works differently. I love the term neurodiversity. And to understand that you have strengths as well as weaknesses. And unfortunately, the education system is really focused, or I'd say it's not designed for you. So you have to find a way to function in a classroom that's not designed for you. The other thing I would say is, do research. There's amazing books out there, and there's a lot of research on understanding the dyslexic mind, as well as our abilities, as well as the deficits.
Right.
And once you start to understand those things, you can start to use your strengths to overcome or compensate for the places where you struggle. There's an amazing book out there called The Dyslexic Advantage, and it's written by two MDs, and they go through a whole host of strengths that are particularly unique to those who have a dyslexic mind.
So in what ways has your perception of yourself and your abilities shifted? Now, you've told me some amazing things. You crashed through that ceiling that they gave you as a child, right? And you've accomplished a lot of things. So how do you see yourself now?
I see myself as somebody who beat the system. I beat the education system that wrote me off. And I proved them wrong. And I proved them wrong by their own standards. And the reason why I have written this book, and I am speaking to people like you and speaking out, is because I want other people who are dyslexic to understand that they're not broken.
Yeah.
They can thrive, but you got to do the work. And you can overcome trauma.
Let's talk about the book. So
Okay.
It took you 5 years to write it. When did it come out?
Last May.
Last May 2023. And
Yes.
what was the expected outcome of this book? So why did you write it, and what did you expect to get from it, and what do you hope readers will get from your book?
I consider myself a really lucky person because of who my parents were and the unconditional love and support that they gave me. There's a lot of parents out there who might have accepted that administrator's words. So this book is for everybody who has faced that kind of adversity. It is also for women or anybody who's being abused. I think I'd like people to understand that emotional abuse and narcissistic abuse is abuse. It's not just, treating somebody badly. It is abuse. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I learned when I started to recover from that is that I didn't understand what was happening to me. Narcissistic abuse is gaslighting, it's manipulation, and I was basically a psychological chew toy to my ex-husband.
Right.
And that's very intentional. That's done to keep you in this place and to keep you confused. Because if you don't understand what's happening, you're not going to leave. So that's part of the abuse. There's a lot of talk now about narcissism, and I'm grateful that is happening because we need to have these conversations. Because the only way to stop it is to start by talking about it and having open and honest conversations. One of the things that I'm astonished about is the people who pull me aside and have private conversations with me and tell me their story. And it's probably about 70% of the women I know at some point in their life have been abused. And the other thing that's astonished me too is it's not just women. There's a lot of men out there who are being psychologically abused. That has really surprised me. I didn't expect that.
So how did your experiences, both positive and negative, shape the person that you are today?
I learned that I can survive pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And I have really learned to thrive. And it's the hero's journey. It's going through something very difficult and coming out of that stronger and more confident. And I don't know if you're familiar with the hero's journey concept, but the last piece of that is to bring what you've learned back to your tribe. And that's why I've written this book.
Okay.
And why I'm speaking out, because I want to teach people what I've learned. I see a lot of people who survive something really difficult and then they get stuck. They may not do the trauma work, or they may live in this place of just being a survivor. And they don't necessarily know how to become a thriver.
Right.
And what that looks like.
I love it. So explain the title, Empowered.
That's actually a funny story. One of my best friends came up with the title because I started out disempowered and I learned how to become empowered. And my friend came up with the title. We were actually sitting in a pub at Vail, Colorado, after a day of skiing. And I had this list of potential titles, and I was so struggling with coming up with the title. And I was like, I'm reading off all these different ideas, and she's sitting there and she's like, no. And then, and then she said, I got to the end of the list, and she said, well, how about disempowered with the DIS crossed out? And I just looked at her and I got, oh my gosh, that's it. She just came out. She knows me very, very well.
Good.
So it was just a perfect fit. And I kept that as the working title, still open to the idea that I might come up with something else. But we ended up keeping that. So, and I think it really fits.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I do want to go back just a little bit.
Sure.
When your parents had a conversation with you when you were older about the conversation they had with the teachers.
Yeah.
Were you struggling at the time when your parents had the conversation with you? And if so, what were you struggling with?
No, I wasn't.
Weren't. Okay.
So the first time they told me the story, they just kind of gave me a brief overview of it. and I had just been accepted into college. So it was, I guess the context of the conversation was, Ellen, you really beat them. This was something that happened when you were 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, we always supported you. So what happened with me, too, is I moved through the education system. I became more and more independent and needed less and less support.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to college, I actually didn't need any more support services. So this was kind of like, yeah, Ellen, you beat them. And now you're going to college when they said you couldn't. And then when I finished my master's degree, and the day that I was going to walk and get my diploma,
Mm-hmm.
before we left to go to graduation, they told me the story in great detail.
Mm.
So it was really a celebratory conversation. Like, this is what they did. This is what they said.
Gotcha.
And wow, you really proved them wrong. So it was a very positive context.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't, nobody was making anybody wrong.
Right.
It was really a place of gratitude and admiration. And we are so proud of you, Ellen, for what you've done.
That's beautiful. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was great.
All right. So give me some strategies. Give me some strategies or some practices that helped you maintain your resilience in place of adversity.
Sure. Well, what I've learned is, the most important thing is to face your trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to try different things to heal. And I approach things as an experiment. Well, let's go talk with this therapist and see if that works.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been times when I've talked with a therapist and it did me no good whatsoever. And I walked away.
Mm-hmm.
And then find somebody else. I've also done things like acupuncture.
Okay.
I've done a lot of EMDR work.
What's that?
And that's been very helpful.
What's EMDR?
EMDR is specifically for, I don't know what it stands for, and I should probably know that. But it is, it's done by a therapist, and a therapist who's trained in EMDR, and it's specifically to rewire the brain to heal from trauma. And again, a therapist must be trained in this technique. So I've also worked with coaches. Coaches are very forward-looking. It's not therapy.
Yeah.
Therapy is backwards looking. So I'd say try different things and see what resonates with you. Mm-hmm. What works with you? What helps you? And if it stops helping, walk away. And then maybe you revisit that down the road, because maybe it just wasn't the right time. So I approach things very much from, let's just try this and see what happens.
Right.
And when you don't attach judgment to it, there's no failure.
Yeah, that's the trick, though.
Mm-hmm.
That's the trick.
and going into it with an open mind and an open heart and just, hey, let's give this a try and see what happens.
I love it.
So that's probably been the most important thing that I've learned.
Okay.
And now I really focus on breath work, meditation, finding time for what's called the sacred silence, to just make sure I take time to just be, stay positive. Visualization is a great tool, visualizing your future self in a successful, positive manner. And taking care of myself. So many of us put other people first. Yeah, I can see your eyes getting bigger. The basics: sleep, nutrition, hydration, exercise. Those, if we take care of our physical body, we're going to automatically be more resilient. We're going to be able to get through harder things.
Right. Oh, I love it. I love it. Hey, so I've asked you a few questions, not a lot. I've asked you a few questions. So now, what would you like to talk about? Something maybe that I didn't bring up that's definitely going to be important to put out to the masses.
Sure. I say a lot of what I do is I put myself out there. just trying to experience things and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
That has led me down a path of meeting some of the most incredible people in the world. And I have made friends all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
Specifically with Mark Devine's program, the retired Navy SEAL.
Right.
I have trained with, like I said, I've trained with Navy SEALs, retired Navy SEALs, 1 or 2 active duty. I have been coached and trained by a recently retired FBI agent who is an expert in Krav Maga and self-defense techniques.
Mm-hmm.
I actually flew from Colorado to Washington, D.C. to spend 2 days training with him in person.
Okay.
He put me through 22 hours of training in 2 days. It was pretty impressive.
Wow.
It's easy for me because I'm an extrovert. So I'm happy to just walk up to somebody and introduce myself.
Right.
But when you put yourself out there, and it can be meetup groups, it can be events, it can be, just introduce yourself to people in a business or, a meetup kind of situation, and try these different events that are focused on personal growth. Be very careful who you choose to work with, because there's a lot of charlatans out there.
Of course.
And I only work and train with people who have very impressive credentials. That's a standard that I hold.
It's funny that you're an extrovert. It's really funny that when you said that you're an extrovert, because I really, just based off of some of the things in your past, I would have thought you would have been an introvert. And then maybe that shifted. Did that shift? Were you always an extrovert? Were you always, seeking out friends and just able to be out there even when you were young and going through a lot of this? Or were you an introvert? You were always an extrovert.
Nope.
That's amazing.
It's just my personality.
Yeah.
And it's really funny. I took when I was in grad school, I took a personality test, and they had a primary and a secondary, personality trait. And I came out as a double extrovert.
A double extrovert. How is your family? I mean, how are your parents? Are they really out there and outgoing as well as you were growing up, and maybe even now?
Well, unfortunately, both of my parents have passed away.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for that. But I definitely take after my father. He
Oh,
was
okay.
boisterous, outgoing. He was loud. He owned the room. And I'm not quite as loud as he was.
That's pretty cool.
But he was just super outgoing.
Good.
He had tons and tons of friends. And I guess that's just naturally who I am as well. So,
Right. Where can we get the book?
Sure.
Just,
It's on Amazon.
okay.
And if you just put in my name, Ellen Busch, don't forget the C. It's Busch like the beer.
Uh-huh.
Family joke. Everybody gets it. You're welcome to visit me at my website. It's actually ellenbusch.com.
Oh, that's
So
real
nice
simple.
Nice and simple. And then, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. And then Instagram, ebush1500, and of course, Facebook. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So do you get a lot of people who reach out to you for words of wisdom, or, hey, I love the book, or do you have another book coming out? Those type of...
I do. I get that question all the time about writing. I'm journaling right now.
Okay.
So, I continue on this road of transformation.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is I feel like now with this work, it's kind of taken on a momentum of its own. And I feel like I'm in this constant state of challenge, transformation, growth, rinse and repeat. So it's really, and I love it. And at this point, I don't think I could stop it even if I wanted to, which is kind of interesting. And yes, I do talk with people all the time. I'm actually taking a coaching course right now.
Okay.
So I will be moving into a formal coaching program once that certification is complete. And this is my second coaching class.
Okay.
So I will be available for coaching. And I'm always happy to talk with parents who have dyslexic children.
Right.
I do that a lot. And, really trying to help them to understand what's happening to their child. And unfortunately, it usually goes hand in hand with trauma.
What's a piece of advice that you give to parents who have children that are dealing with that?
To understand how painful the struggle is.
Mm-hmm.
And your child may be traumatized through this process.
Right.
And to give them all the love and support that they need. And to, think about working with a therapist for your child. Start the trauma work now.
Yeah.
Because it just gets worse with age.
A lot of times you want to dance around it, sort of like your teachers did. Hey, well, this is a death sentence. There's nothing we can do for, right? Get her in this. You hear that, and that's just, it's unfortunate where some, it's probably just one person. It's probably not an indictment on the school system, right?
Right.
Or a team of people, right? That just don't want to put in the work.
Right.
So it's really empowering to know that your parents were there to support you, right?
Yes.
To get you through it, and they didn't want to take that. I have a similar experience with my daughter. She didn't have dyslexia, but she had a learning deficiency, and she had a lot of when she was going through high school, they gave her some additional time to do the tests, things like that, right? And there was some other things that they did, and she did the same thing. She got out, she finished that, she graduated high school, she went to college, she got her bachelor's degree. She's talking about working on her master's now. So it's the same story, right? Mm-hmm. The difference is, at least in this one, we had some advocates, and we had some teachers who were not so much advocates as well here in California. Okay. But just sharing those stories, right? And she talks about it openly, because it's like, hey, it is what it is, right? But it's not a death sentence, right? You can do what they, So I appreciate your book. I read it because a lot of the things that you've said about your own upbringing and things like that sounds very similar, right? And I'd also, the difference is you're going out and you're empowering people, right?
Exactly.
To get through it and giving them ways to get through it. And I really haven't, right? Maybe this podcast is, in a sense, right? But I really haven't. And I'd like to see some of your, strategies, your story, thing that you've gone through. So I think I'm gonna get it. But what I am going to ask you to do, how can I get an autographed version of it? Do I buy it, send it to you, and then you'll send it back? What do we do?
I'll tell you what.
What do we do?
We can exchange addresses, and I will send you a signed copy with a personal note. How does that sound?
Oh, well, that sounds even better. What I'll do for you is I will buy the book, and then I will give it to someone who I believe could benefit from it. So we'll make those promises to each other. I like that.
That sounds great. If I could just add one thing to what you could do as a parent, teaching your child how to persevere through things will be the key to their resiliency.
Absolutely.
And my father sending me on Outward Bound was a piece of that, a huge piece of that.
Really quick before we go, explain Outward Bound.
Outward Bound is an outdoor education program. It was started, right around the end of World War II. Mm-hmm. And one of the founders, I believe his name was Kurt Hahn. Mm-hmm. He noticed during the war, he was in the convoys, I believe, that were shot at by the submarines in the Atlantic. And ships were sunk, and he noticed that young men were dying. Mm-hmm. Young men who were strong and capable and who you would think would survive were not surviving. Right. And it was the older men who may have not been physically as strong, but they were making it.
Yeah. They had knowledge.
And he realized that it was about mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It was about mindset. So it's an outdoor education system or program where you're put into challenging situations
Mm-hmm.
and you have to work through and persevere. And I did a 2-week trip on the Green River in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And we did 98 miles rafting. We did hiking, climbing, rappelling. And I rappelled a 100-foot cliff at 15.
Oh.
And that's awesome. It's in the book. But for me, that was a game changer.
Yeah.
Because if I could do that and overcome that fear, I could face any test where I was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
That made the whole dyslexia battle easy.
Yeah.
And it changed the trajectory of my life.
That's awesome.
And I loved it.
That's awesome. It's funny you say this. I was watching this show last night, a new show called Tracker. And they were looking for this guy he was missing. But the whole story was there was a school that the parents sent the young man to. And it sounds similar to Outward Bound, but it really was a school that was hard. It was very disciplined, but it taught you survival techniques and skills. Mentally, just surviving events and things that happen, and also physically surviving out in the world and out in the wilderness, and fires and all this stuff. And it's crazy. Anyway, yeah. I don't know where I was going with that, except for the fact that I just saw that and I'm listening to you talk. You talk about scaling 100-foot cliffs, and like that is remarkable. That is really a remarkable experience. I'm more of an extrovert now, but I was really an introvert when I was a kid, meaning I was just super shy. Once I got to know you, I was fine. But before that, yeah, I was really, really shy. So when they was talking about going to camps and doing all these things, I was like, I want to stay home with my grandma.
Sure.
So, oh man, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. These are good activities that children, young adults can take part in and really grow. I did it in the military. So I did over 20 years in the military myself. And you learn these things and you push yourself beyond what your mind thinks it can do. Right.
Absolutely.
And it's just lessons that continue. You benefit from them throughout your life. Right. So I can see you're skiing all the time. You're out there river rafting. You're doing all these things. Colorado is definitely where you need to be.
Yes. I love it here. I've been here 3.5 years and I love it. So
I'm going to ask you one last question, but I'm going to let you say what you were getting ready to say first. I don't want you to lose it.
So my dad was also an Army veteran.
Mm-hmm.
So
Go Army.
he understood exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And
he used to give me hard chores to do. Sometimes, it was things like stacking firewood.
Right.
And I'd stand there and I'd put my hand on my hips and I'd say, oh, Daddy, this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd say, you know what? It's good for you. It's going to put hair on your chest. And I'd look up at him and say, but Daddy, I'm a girl. And he would say, go do it anyway. It's good for you.
Right? Because you look and you're like, oh my God, all this wood, right? But then when you do it and you put it there and you realize, well, that wasn't as hard as I thought. And you feel so accomplished, right? In those experiences, is that the same feeling you had?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You look back at it and you're like, wow, that wasn't so bad. Or I accomplished that. There's a host of positive emotions that you can have with that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, and I should have asked it a while ago. So in hindsight, I should have asked you a while ago. How was the writing experience? You said it took you 5 years. How was that experience? And when did you know you were done?
I had to decide to be done.
Yeah.
Because I could have kept going. Well, I knew I had a story to tell when I lost my mom.
Okay.
In the span of 10 months, I went from escaping from my ex-husband to losing my mom in a tragic accident.
Okay.
In 10 months. So it was a pretty intense 10 months. and I got through it, and I knew I had a story to tell. I didn't know when I started writing that I had more chapters to live.
Yeah.
That would be added at the end, i.e. the training with the FBI agent, the training with the Navy SEALs. That would come a few years down the road. It was a very slow process for me, and I worked with a writing coach, which was one of the best decisions I ever made.
Okay.
Award-winning poet and novelist, and she was wonderful, and she took me through just the whole process of telling the story and not telling it in a chronological way, to really kind of weave stories together. And she really helped me kind of formulate that. At the same time, there's still an arc of the book. There's a continuous story. So it was a labor of love. I enjoyed it. And it was it was very healing. You know, it was really cathartic because it forced me to look back on all these events and really pull them apart to write them down. So I'm glad that I did it for myself as well as whoever gets something from it.
Let's see the book. Let's see the book again.
Sure. There it is.
Let's see that. All right. So if you don't remember Empower, you can remember what the book looks like. You see it in the stores. Go ahead and pick it up. You can get it on Amazon.
BarnesandNoble.com. And I'll actually be doing a book signing here in Boulder on May 11th, I think. It's on my website.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All these book signings, I need to come out to California every now and again.
I'd love to.
All right. Hey, well, thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing your incredible journey with us today. Your story really resonates, and empowerment serves as a beacon of hope for anyone facing their own challenges, from overcoming dyslexia and escaping abuse to finding strength and purpose. You've shown us that every obstacle can be transformed into an opportunity for growth. And I'm definitely wishing you continued success. I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate the opportunity to tell my story. And me telling my story is an act of service. I want to help people.
Continued success. I admire you.
Thank
I really
you.
do. I really